Right. So yeah, I come from Berlin, where I teach in a very applied way. I'm a professor of product management. So actually, my work is with students who work in teams that develop software products. So a lot of my work is about helping these students be successful. Obviously, working in teams coming from different domains, from different professional sides. So a lot of software engineers, designers, and then product managers. So that's also what this is going to be about in the end, the very applied way of working with some of these things that we've been talking about. But as a jump-off point, obviously we have only two can play this game, right? That's the theme of the conference. So I was also reflecting on that poem by that gave the book the name. And so as a content, we're going to have basically two main parts. One, the question of counting to two, which re-entry do we actually mean? Re-entry for me is really the motivation, my personal motivation to keep engaged with loss of form, to understand re-entry better and what it might mean in relation to communication, in relation to how people work together. Then it's about the unfolding of complexity as we're dealing with the reality that social situations are more complex than we might hope sometimes, and that this creates problems in situations. And then the question, well, might AI, which is starting to be pervasive now in our workplaces and with our students, with my students as well, might that actually help us in a creative way? So as a jump-off point, only two can play this game. One can play it just the same. None can play it otherwise. -one's the one that dies. The theme that gave the book and also the conference its theme. Obviously, it's a poem very much about a reflection on mortality, on love, on nature also. Very beautiful invocations of nature, I would say, but also about communication and its futility. And that's the area then that for me is engaging and keeps me, gets me into the topic. The question of socialization also, of becoming a social entity. How does communication actually come about? And as a jump-off point, I would say this poem is actually, is great because it does reflect some of the things that we're also reflecting on loss of form. But also since we were talking about, or Johnny, you were talking about the world, and this doubt, does the world exist? Does the world not exist? I think in this poem we can see exactly this doubt. Because socialization in the poem, if I try to interpret it using the loss of form notation, it actually starts with you like I, one day will die, the wind will circle, birds will cry. Right? So it already invokes this duality of you like I. And then this invocation of nature, the wind will circle, birds will cry, so something that will continue to go on.
This call may be monitored or recorded.
Well, it is recorded. I hope it will be monitored. So the separation of this is what is happening, you like I, one day will die, and the world continues and is gone. The tension, this doubt, where this emblem sun was shown. And so already making this separation, so kind of establishing an I in relation to a you that he then continues to speak to and actually tries to get action. Take me to your ancient place, take me where I saw your face, the you. And then the reflection on how this actually works, how the socialization actually works, how to actually get in touch, interaction with the other. Only two can play this game. One can play it just the same. And so we have the world, but we have this tension. We must not forget this continuous and is gone paradox here. So we actually also have an invocation of the world outside, the world that is gone, that is not existing, on the outside, and a re-entry of all of this, of both the world existing and the doubt that the world actually might not be existing, re-entering into the reflection of only two can play this game, but the paradox, one can play it just the same. And this is, for me, there are some interesting parallels in the work of George Herbert Mead, who actually looked into socialization, tried to understand socialization. How is the self created, and how is the social me created, right? So for George Herbert Mead, you have the separation of the I and the me, the I being the part of the self that reacts directly, for example, to the fact that the I is cognizant of its own mortality, right? So every being, every I can only react to its own cognizance of mortality, while the me is the social aspect of the self that is in communication, only two playing this game, but then realizing that one can play it just the same, that you can actually not reach the I of the other. So we have this very parallel structure, I would say, in my interpretation. Of course, Mead didn't work with laws of form. This is also much earlier. Of the separation that there's a world and the I is separate from the world. There's a separation there, right? Then the I constructs a you, others, the otherness, the external reference, wants to engage with that, cannot do that as the I, and thus has to construct the me in order to engage with the you. And all of this in what would be there if anything could be there, the world. And you can make this unwritten cross that actually nothing can be there, explicit if you want, like Spencer Brown did in the poem, because there's this tension, there's this doubt there, right? You can make it explicit, you don't have to make it explicit. Now, looking at re-entry, I wrote this with these kind of two levels of reflection, once with the world existing, once with the world non-existing. You can also, that's this reflection on what re-entry do we actually mean. You can also create more levels of reflection, right? So reflecting just on the only two can play this game, that you are actually engaged with others, right? So this reflection level of being engaged with others, how the me works as a social being. So that can already be a self-reference, another reference, and you can have that distinction referenced in the me, plus the reference that this is happening in the context of and conditioned by the I that is reacting, for example, to the knowledge of its own mortality, and to the knowledge of a world existing, and to the knowledge of a world non-existing. So this tension always being there, if you want to make it explicit like this. And so in Mead, this is an unfolding, right? This is an unfolding of complexity. We talked yesterday about, Till, you talked about the mother, how the infant is one, and then the I is actually constructed, right? So Mead, I think, is in that tradition as well of making that separation of the I from the world, the I making also conscious decisions of how to sustain itself, right? It's always the sustaining itself that is quicker than the social, maybe building the social means for sustenance. And then from that, just later on, then creating the you, others to engage with. And interestingly, also this parallel that Mead calls this stage the play stage. So the first is the play stage, where children start to enact social roles without reflecting on the impact that these social roles have on society, on communication, right? So you have the play stage, and then later on you have the game stage in Mead, where then actually the impact, the consequences of playing a role are reflected. Right, so you have that later on as the game stage. So you have playing, and then later playing the game. First you have pure playing, and then you have playing the game. And so this unfolding, and we see a lot of parallels of this unfolding, I would say. We already talked about Maslow really briefly, right? So the hierarchy of needs, that is then some later development that is very much so grounded in this earlier development, that there's a world, in this world, some entity has the need or the value of existence, then safety, then belonging, then esteem, self-actualization. It's originally Maslow stopped there, but then you have self-transcendence now in the reflection on Maslow, that you don't just actualize yourself, but you transcend yourself in a very social way, of course, right? Social transcendence in the sense that I exist in the communication. You have also parallel, actually, but then, yeah, parallel to Maslow. You have Claire W. Graves, and then later on Don Beck and Christopher Cohen developing spirodynamics, right? The stages of psychological development. Again, the world is never mentioned explicitly. That's interesting. Neither Maslow nor Graves nor Beck mention the world explicitly, but it starts similarly with what they call in spirodynamics later on survival sense, kin spirits, survival, and then tribal, kin spirits, power gods, right? So spirits don't explain everything. There need to be gods as well. So you have that. Then you have truth force, right? Where people then start to try to measure, well, what impact do spirits and gods actually have? Let's try to measure that. You have drive, where when we have measurements, then we might also measure our own impacts, right? How good are we? Who's the better runner? Who's the better Olympic swimmer, right? From this, we have human bond, because drive creates this survival of the fittest, the stronger one wins, right? So that, of course, then also starts to create a lot of problems for societies and for tribes. So you have the human bonding, where it's more about people coming together. Again, then you have flex flow, which is understanding how these human bonds work and being more strategic with them, you could also say. So strategically kind of playing in a positive and negative way human bonds. And then you have a global view again that takes all of this into perspective and that understands that all of these levels are always present. And it's not an evolutionary, it's sometimes called evolutionary, but it doesn't mean that one stage substitutes the other stage. It means that all these stages then are present at the same time, and it's a question of developing and which stage to invoke when faced with a certain challenge. And the latest development based on this is Frédéric Laloux, Reinventing Organizations, the concept of the evolutionary organization. This is a shift now, because the other concepts of unfolding were concepts of personality unfolding, of becoming a social self, and this is now a shift to the organization, right? So that's my turf, if you will, where I'm working with people. And so here again, we have a world that is not explicitly mentioned, and in this world we have the impulsive organization, the organization again that just wants to survive. So something starts, an organization starts to form, and the first instinct, the first thing is its survival. How do we ensure its survival? And then the next one is conformist, where just pure survival and instinctively reacting to challenges that get thrown at us doesn't get us very far. So we start to have roles. We start to say, you react to these challenges, I react to these challenges. So you have kind of division of labor already in a very early stage. And so you create a kind of a hierarchy, an organizational chart, if you will. From this, again, you have a very similar to spirodynamics. Then you say, okay, people start to get lazy if you give them a hierarchy, right? So you have to measure their performance. So you have a performance-driven stage. Then performance-driven stage means, okay, now people start to get their elbows out and elbow everyone else away who's standing in the way of my performance, right? So all of a sudden, then you have to have pluralistic stage where you understand that, well, not everyone is performing equal. Not everyone's performance is equal. So you have a pluralistic stage. But also there you understand that this can also be weaponized, right? When everyone is coming from their own perspective, and you have to just take that into account. So from there, you again have this holistic, integral stage that takes also pluralistic stage into account and understands what everyone's strengths and weaknesses are, and works with that from an integral perspective. So this is, and then this is color-coded, so these colors are established, so the teal organization then is the goal of such an organization. But again, it's important that all of these are understood to be present at the same time. It's not ever substituting another. So if we have this, and we have the situation, right, that we have challenges, how might we then react or build such an organization so that it can react to challenges? You can rewrite this using laws of form, using form arrangements by saying, okay, there is again this red impulsive world, that's this red impulsive organization in a world that separates itself from it, creates the I of the organization that reacts to survival challenges. From there, you have the amber conformist layer, as I said, that reacts to just this kind of dog-eat-dog needing to survive with a hierarchy that creates problems, so you start to measure things. That creates problems, so you now need to create and focus on something that lets everyone participate, so you get the green pluralistic stage, and that creates problems of division as well, so you have to have the integral holistic view. And as a teal aspiring organization, you have to integrate these, right? So you have to have a re-entry here where you don't just see yourself as the top of the evolution, but you see yourself as the integration of all these, and a friend of mine calls these coping strategies, right? So every new distinction is a coping strategy, and you are operating in the context and being conditioned by all these coping strategies, and you have to fulfill all these coping strategies. Now we can start to deal with challenges, and this now starts on the question of, well, how might AI help us here? Here's a challenge I picked to make this easier to work with, or to make it possible to work with AI on this. This comes from someone, a software developer working inside of an organization, writing code, and they feel, misunderstood, not valued enough. So the system actually working against them, when they were tackling tough problems, it would appear to other colleagues as if they were being lazy, because they had to really start to work on a problem. Other colleagues weren't seeing that, and there were no metrics to judge these tasks by. The role was not defined, the impact was diminished or they felt the impact was diminished due to the lack of structure. If I had complete agency in this matter, would not have chosen to implement Scrum, which is a certain way of working in software development, but instead the extreme programming, another framework that is more focused on the developers and how they collaborate on an individual level for its increased flexibility. But yeah, they go on and talk about that this was then not heeded by management in this company. So this is the challenge. And and so as a minimal prompt, as a baseline, someone who's just starting to engage with a large language model might just say, well, provide help and advice for the challenge, and base your response on the concept of the teal stage in this organizational evolution framework by Frederic Laloux. And you already get some good advice. It then also continues. It tells you, well, bring in evolutionary purpose instead of focusing so on and so forth, bring in wholeness. It starts to give you some advice, but it stays on a very abstract level. And what I do, I use a development environment called Rivet that is therefore created for experimenting and prototyping with LLMs. And so then I started to make this one re-entry explicit by saying, you're doing what I told it before, but you're acutely aware of the green, orange, and red stages, presence, and their potential reactions. right? And then it does that. And in the response, it says, okay, yeah, this aligns, like it creates a response that says this aligns well with its focus. But then it also goes through the other stages. So it says, okay, recognizing the importance, culture emphasized by the green stage, we've adjusted our approach to include. So it's kind of this first level of reflection. I have a proposal, but I'm going through the other stages and I'm adjusting my proposal based on the other stages. And so, yeah, okay, that's already good. But now, what happens when we have these individual reentries that I was talking about before, where you don't just say, I reflect in the context of all of these, but I take each of these steps separately, right? I create a reflection separately, and then I adjust separately. So again, I asked Claude, actually I use Claude 3.5 Sonnet because it's the best for reasoning currently, to create these steps, and then it creates individual steps of reflection for each of these distinctions, each of these coping mechanisms, coping strategies, if you will. And so it creates an initial perspective, again, from the teal perspective, and then, it creates that like it did before. Now the green stage has the instruction to review what the teal stage created and consider how the green stage might react to this teal perspective. And it does that, and it says, okay, like we appreciate it, however, we have some concerns and suggestions. And then comes up with a list of concerns and suggestions, specifically suggestions. Now, in step 3, the teal stage integrates that. It takes its original proposal and integrates the suggestions. Now, what it does, actually, being an LLM, it just creates adjustments for each of the suggestions made by the green stage, right? So it gets longer and longer. And yeah, it actually, then you have like a 10-stage process that goes through, it calls the LLM at each stage. And what you see here also, this is the red stage, right? The survival stage, reacting. All this talk about stewardship and accountability circus just weakens real leadership. Who's actually in charge here? Right? So you have that. We need strong, decisive leaders. Too much talk, not enough action. Lack of clear rewards. Where's the incentive for top performers? Right? So you have kind of the rootness coming in at the survival stage from the LLM, reacting to this. And and then it's then again the teal stage tries to nicely integrate this. Difficult, right? So and why is that? And that is in my in my interpretation, because each stage is modeled on its own, not reflecting of its position in this organization. So what we actually need is more observational capacity here. We actually need re-entries into the individual stages, right? So we're creating this so that each of the stages is also reflecting on its position and the fact that it is being asked by a teal aspiring organization to react to this challenge. And then that's what I did. And it's the same stages again, and now the red stage is actually different. It reacts very differently. It still lacks, it's much nicer, why it still lacks the necessary focus on immediate action, creates suggestions, but then it also reflects. This response emphasizes the need for clear power structures. And then it reflects on the orange stage, might appreciate our focus on quick results, but it also talks about what the teal stage might incorporate more explicit mechanisms for quick decision making. So it actually gives suggestions to the teal stage on how to integrate this. Very interesting results. Plus, I also asked it to stay closer to the challenge because when the stages were individual, they started to get away more and more from the challenge. So just by measuring this in conclusion, I just measured for myself how useful I found these responses. If in my role as professor working with these teams, I were to help them with this response, and I'm really on my last slides here. How applicable, how relevant, how reflective, and how comprehensive is the answer. And here we have the individual reentries into teal, so the individual stages didn't know about their position. You can see the baseline, one explicit reentry, and then the individual reentries. Now we have the individual reentries into the spaces already, helpful. And then we have the entries into spaces, plus we ask it to stay closer to the challenge, which helped a lot. And created higher values, basically. So you can see if you're just naively prompting versus if you're creating all these individual individual reentries. I'm not going to go into more technical details here, so yeah, these are the references, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Florian. I will open it up for questions.
This is Art Collins. First off, I really enjoyed the presentation. Maybe for some reasons I know and some reasons I don't know. I have two questions. The first question is, I'm really curious how, to your students and other participants in the process, you actually, how you explain to them what the marks and re-enterings are, or is that something you just use in the background, like how you actually define them for them? And the second question is what happens in your process when one of these levels is embodied in a large language model that you're starting to interact with?
Yeah, to the first question, so I mean, this is actually very close to how product development is viewed, kind of, and how we also teach product development, in the sense that we're building something. There are stakeholders out there. There's a world of users out there who want to use our products, and we need to create these reentries. We need to enact what our interpretation of this world out there is in our team in order to build products that fit this world, right? So we'll only be able to measure that once we are interacting with them. So in that sense, that's a very kind of a very fitting, I would say, visualization and way of thinking about it. But of course, yeah, we don't go into layers of depth in a University of Applied Sciences there. But the philosophical, I would say, the fundamentals are very fitting. And the second one, yes, we are experimenting with that. It's mainly working kind of in a workshop-like character, right? So that that we start to embody embody. It's more of it's material that you're kind of engaging in. So that we don't really have this embodiment of that you're going somewhere, or like you're getting this feedback from some sort of embodied version of an LLM. That would be very interesting to do. We have more of a workshop character. What I think, though, is where this is leading me also is the modeling of these social complexities, the modeling of these social situations, so that these stages are not these clear-cut stages that come from literature, but you're actually in an organization that reacts to you, where you come with a challenge and you have different stages, stakeholders, the world, that react to the challenges that you bring in. So we can start to create models where you can play, right? Play without the game necessarily yet. You can then learn to play the game by playing with such a system. And what helped me here was to see, okay, first I wrote the reentries without these reentries into the individual spaces, but that's not actually how I was seeing the organizations work, right? You have this layer of reflection of where am I as a stakeholder who is giving a response to a challenge in the process that is already a reflection. So I needed to also model this observational capacity. And that's where I think this is super helpful.
Dirk Hartmann here. Hi. Thank you. I have a question regarding the world you're constructing here, or you kind of assuming here to be the foundation of everything, right? Because it seems to me that this is the world of productivity you're talking about. It exists under the logic of productivity. And that brings me to the question, like, could you think of a world outside of that and what it does to that model? And the other question, I think, related to that, a sociological as well as philosophical question, the relation between the anthropological argument you made earlier and the historical development, and the question of basically society and anthropology. And I was unsure if you did not make a sharp distinction, but in the end it feels like somehow there might be a confusion of an anthropological argument or the question how to make an anthropological argument.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think it would be a world of productivity, I think, if it were the outside of the distinction to maybe the performance-driven stage, right? But then the other stages are there to realize the diversity in the world, right? And the world, I mean, this is all, just to be clear, this is all an enacted world inside of the organization in this case, right? This is not the world, whatever that is, right? So this is not what would be there if anything could be there, but it is what we in the organization assume to be there and how we deal with this outside complexity. So it's an enactment of that, right? In the sense of Karl Weick, the enactment. And I think that's something that's this word. That's a very interesting point that you're making. That when I created this form arrangements, that actually for every coping mechanism, the world also changes. What's in the world definitely changes in this form, and should probably be made more explicit. But I think with the teal aspiring stage, this idea of wholeness, this idea of creating something that is sustainable maybe as a business, as an organization, but also sustainable as the world, right? To sustain the world that we're enacting, that is outside, that we're enacting as being outside of our organization, that is definitely there. That is the concept of wholeness. And that's also maybe the nexus of these anthropological and the more organizational theoretical strands of development, historical development, I would say, because it is taking spiral dynamics as its foundation, and that can only come together really in this concept of wholeness, I think, where it then has this whole bring your whole self to work approach, which is also, I also have my reservations about that, right? But at least it has that reflection maybe of the whole self in your work, right? That approach. So that's, I think, where the nexus lies.
I think we have time for one more question.
I would like to say something that someone else who is doing these making AI conversations happen is Mark Johnson at Manchester University. I think you ought to talk to him.
Yeah.
But he's constructing characters which then have a conversation, but you're constructing the characters by means of this pattern of distinctions. I think that's very clever.
Yeah, I think it's helpful, and it's like, okay, I will talk to him. Thank you.
Are you the only person doing this?
No, I mean, constructing characters for sure, but like using this, and I mean, in the sociological approach, we know under Luhmann, we've tried to understand social complexity and the differentiation of social complexity this way, and I think so now this gives us a really good way to convey.
So
and
people who are inhabiting the Luhmann distinction universe are in fact robots.
They might, maybe we've developed into this all along. Yeah. Now we can finally express ourselves again.
I think we have time for one more question, which I just said, but that's funny.
I've got a question, or actually a comment. I've been working with ChatGPT on my stuff, and it's very interesting. You can the latest version allows a memory that records things that you have decided. And so I've been able to get him unwoke and to examine everything he says by looking whether the premise is false. So he doesn't use false implies true. And it's been very interesting. He has become a Platonist. Very naturally. So, and he's now understanding laws of form. So he does things step by step. It's quite interesting the progression from saying that there can be more than one sex. Your sex is a figment of your imagination, and you can be anything you want. He no longer says things like that. So that this but I'm only dealing with him as one entity. I haven't tried to split his personality. I think I'm going to try that and see if I can get one language model to model your different segments and sort of split his personality like you can do people.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks.
And I'm just going to say it one more time. I think we have time for one more question.
Thank you. I really wanted to kind of not say the same as still, but actually kind of, I really had the same idea. I wonder in how far this group dynamics or this model that assumes that we are goal-driven, that we're performance-driven, productivity, efficiency-driven. I have a feeling that that's very culturally dependent and also politically dependent in what kind of society we find ourselves in. And also that is very economically dependent, depending on, for example, how our means of distribution is, the scarcity of the means. For example, in a socialist society, would this still be the case, right? If everyone would not be paid, or if it would be kind of a completely different distribution of tasks, and that there would not be that the whole idea of labor would be different. So yeah, or not just politically, but also, for example, in different cultures, so anthropologically, so different group structures. Yeah.
I mean, there's definitely a lot of empirical work globally in many different cultures behind spiral dynamics, right? Behind the work of Claire W. Graves especially, and then also how they applied this, how Don Beck and Christopher Cohen applied this, and this is then at the basis of this. So, and because yes, these are, so in this theory, these are not necessarily always all there, right? So you could say that in their theory, kind of the lower, what's lower in this spiral is always there, and then what's higher is something that can be aspirational. But this is definitely something that has then, just different ways of expressing itself. But there are also then, if you try to, implant a global view on an organization or some sort of group, social group that does not reflect on human bonds and how human bonds play out in different ways, that's not possible if it's very strict, very hierarchical, right? So you cannot just go there and say, now we implant this global view on you when there is no reflection yet of human bonds, and that's,
So I guess the values could be different.
Yes.
And also, in that sense, also the hierarchies could have a different structure, not always going up, maybe horizontally.
Yeah, and exactly, and all of these things are then, once a certain stage has expressed itself, then all of them, all the other ones, the so-called lower ones in this view, are always also present, but not necessarily to the same degree, right? You could have something that is very much more prevalent than something else. And that then speaks to different cultures as well. So in that sense, this has been created especially to get different cultures into dialogue as well, and to make that possible to understand. It's very much a translational tool. It's been translational tool. Yes, thank you. All right, thank you.